Hey everyone, thanks for tracking along with our summer teaching series. We're in episode 5 of our series called Interruption, the story of Joseph, on welcoming disruption and resisting control. If you've missed out on the first 4 installments, let me catch you up to speed on what's been happening in Joseph's life. I think it'll be pretty helpful to retrace our steps. So you may recall that Joseph was one of Jacob's 12 sons, but Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons. And Jacob gave Joseph a special robe of many colors. A bold fashion statement that screamed, "I'm Dad's favorite." And then Joseph had these 2 odd dreams about ruling over his brothers, and his brothers were bowing down before him. So because of all this, Joseph's brothers despise him. And when they get the chance, they strip him of his fancy robe, and they cast him into a pit. And then they sell young Joseph off into slavery, where he ends up in Egypt, purchased by an officer named Potiphar. The story, it seems to be unraveling for Joseph, and yet we are told that Yahweh was with Joseph. He was successful, and he found favor with Potiphar. So Potiphar actually made him an overseer and put him in charge of all he had. He fully trusted Joseph. But Joseph was very handsome. And Potiphar's wife, she desired Joseph. She wanted to sleep with Joseph, but he refused. One day, she caught him by his garments, insisting that he sleep with her, but Joseph fled. Potiphar's wife then flips the story around, makes an accusation against Joseph, and he is thrown into prison. Again, the story is unraveling for Joseph. But in almost the exact same language, we are told that Yahweh was with Joseph. And he again found favor with another officer, this time a jailer. And that jailer also put Joseph in charge of all the prison. He too fully trusted Joseph. Then in prison, Joseph is with a couple of inmates. Actually, they were both officers. The 2 of them each have a dream. And Joseph interprets those 2 dreams. And in doing so, he pleads with the officer, "Remember me when it goes well with you. I was stolen from my land, and I do not deserve to be in this pit." The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Do you see what's happening here? This isn't a random retelling of events. These stories have been weaved together intentionally to draw us in and help us track with what's really happening. This isn't the unfortunate tale of a poor chap who couldn't catch a break. Something bigger is happening. These repeated themes, they help stitch together the story. And as we continue in Genesis 41, I want all of us to pay attention to the way things continue to be weaved together. If it's possible, I'd love for you to track along with your own copy of the Bible. That'd be really helpful. So I know for me personally, I love to sketch up my Bible with notes and underlines and colors. And if you're the kind of person who likes to do the same thing, I'd encourage you to make note of these various themes as they arise in this chapter. So let's dive in. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt came and ate the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. And Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Today I remember my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream that same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh. But God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot and as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way! Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Did you see the themes reemerging? How many did you spot? Remember, we've been tracing Joseph's life on a downward spiral. Yeah, there have been some moments of upswing, but largely this has been a downward descent. And remember how we left off with Joseph forgotten at the end of chapter 40 in the pit? Well, chapter 41 punctuates the despair of Joseph's state by telling us that nothing happens for 2 whole years. But then, Pharaoh has 2 dreams, and no one can interpret them. And finally, the forgotten Hebrew is remembered. He's taken out of the pit, and he's given new clothes. And then he proceeds to interpret the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams. But not before he reminds Pharaoh who the true hero of the story is. I can't do it, but God will give you your answer through me. He tells Pharaoh that the 2 dreams are really one dream. The vision of the fat cows getting eaten up by the scrawny cows and the vision of the healthy grain getting swallowed up by the scorched grain represent the same thing. 7 years of abundance are coming to Egypt, followed by 7 years of drought. So you better get ready. Oh, and you also might want to pick someone wise and discerning to, oversee this little project. Pharaoh is totally impressed with Joseph, and he makes this interesting statement. Can we find anyone like this man? Clearly, you're the one for the job. Have you ever dreamed about writing the job description for the role that perfectly suits you? I think Joseph just pulled this off. And then Pharaoh completes this line with this profound statement. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? This is the first time in the Bible that God's Spirit is said to be within someone like this. In response to Joseph's incredible wisdom and the fact that God's Spirit seems to be resting upon him in a very significant way, Pharaoh puts him in charge. Before, he was in charge of Potiphar's entire household. Then, he was in charge of the entire prison. Now, he's in charge of the entire nation. And then, Joseph again receives royal clothing as a sign of his new status. All these themes are weaved together to help us stay focused on the bigger story. There's an arc to Joseph's journey that we are meant to track with. And the author is trying to make sure that we piece the whole story together. We need to make sure that we don't get caught up in a single episode and lose sight of what's really going on. If we just zoom in on those early installments, we might feel like this is a tragic tale of a bunch of jealous brothers. Or if we zoom in on that encounter with Potiphar's wife, we might think this is a story of a scandalous temptress. But those are only episodes. They don't tell the whole story. And I don't know about you, but I know how easily I get caught up in specific episodes of my own life, losing track of the bigger story. Back when I was just finishing up Bible college, I had the opportunity to apply for a job as youth pastor. And the job was actually at a church that I had already interned at. And the pastor who was making the hire had spoken into my life, affirming me, assuring me that I was indeed called to be a pastor. So when the time came for the application process, I thought I was pretty much a lock. But there was one other applicant. And that person was a bit more mature and had a bit more experience. And in the end, I didn't get the job. A few years later, I had another opportunity to apply for a job as a youth pastor. This time, the person making the hire actually sought me out. They told me I was exactly the kind of leader they were looking for. This felt like an incredible opportunity, and I wanted that job really bad. But they had found one other applicant who also fit the mold for the kind of youth pastor they were looking for. And that other person was already serving as a youth pastor in a really large church, so they had all kinds of experience that I didn't have, and they got the job instead of me. Amidst this crushing news, I started to feel like maybe I was supposed to just stay where I was. Tara and I were living in my hometown of Dalmany. It was familiar, it was comfortable, it was safe. And then just as I was starting to get resigned to remaining where I was, I, out of the blue, received this totally impersonal email. It was obviously a template email that was being sent out to many people. And it went something like this. Dear youth worker, you are receiving this email because I met you once and you made a good impression, or someone recommended you to me. No kidding. And this email came from the other end of the country. So I'm chilling in Dalmany, Saskatchewan, receiving this stock email from a big church several provinces over, and I'm just wondering, how many other youth workers got this email? I was intrigued to know how this person even heard of me, so I looked them up on Facebook and found out that we had only one friend in common, and it was the pastor at the second job that didn't hire me. I remember talking with Tara that night, saying, I'm pretty confident this is not a thing at all, but it's kind of neat that this random church reached out to me. And Tara's response was totally unexpected. By this point, I was just tired of the whole thing, tired of getting my hopes up and getting rejected, and I was just looking for the whole process to be over with. But Tara spoke into the moment with such clarity and wisdom and discernment. And she said, you're probably right. We probably shouldn't get too excited about this church in Toronto, but still, I don't think we're meant to stay in Dalmany. I don't believe that's what God has in store for us. I remember so clearly the way she just stunned me with those words. But then I realized that I had lost track of the story I was living in. I had set out with a desire to serve God, a desire to use my gifts and passions to impact the lives of young people as a pastor. I set out with confidence because people in my life who knew me and cared for me, people I trusted, spoke words of affirmation into my life. But at this point in my life, I was starting to feel like I was living a story of rejection, a story of not being good enough, a story of doubt. Putting myself out there to be evaluated and rejected was wearing on me. So I was drawn to the comfort and safety of staying right where I was. But Tara sensed that wasn't the end of our story. So I responded to the email, and it turns out they really were interested in me. And they were interested in one other applicant. So I'm thinking to myself, awesome. So far, I'm 0 for 2 on these 2-horse races. Here we go again. But they ended up hiring both of us. How great is that? So while that was clearly not the end of my entire story, I'm able to look back and realize that I was in a season of life. And during that season, there were several episodes weaved together to make up a larger story. And several people who played important roles in that journey. Some who spoke significant words that reverberated for years. Others who seemed to thwart my plans. And others who helped carry the story forward. When I zoomed in on one particular episode of that journey, I could easily lose sight of the plot. Sometimes I got mixed up, believing that a particular role was the key to my happiness. Other times I felt like pursuing my dreams was a wasted effort. But those were only episodes in a larger story of my life. So a question for all of us to ponder. Are you focused on an episode or the story? Are you caught up in the current events of your life and in the meantime forgetting the larger story that's unfolding around you? Are you looking back to better times? Are you yearning for the way that things used to be, regretting the ways that things have turned out? Are you holding out hope for some specific turn of events in your life? Are you banking on a plot twist to straighten things out, determined that the next episode is going to be the one where everything comes together? The story of Joseph reminds us that life is made up of a series of episodes weaved together to form the story of our lives. And we will learn to appreciate and understand the events of our past, present, and future if we're willing to keep our mind on the greater story we are a part of. Because what is the story of Joseph really about? Is this a tale that teaches us that nice guys really do win in the end? No. Is this a story about the importance of hard work and perseverance in the face of challenges? No. Is this story a warning about the potential of humanity for great evil and deceit? Well, we do see that happening, but I don't think that's the main idea. So what is the story of Joseph really about? Well, it's about God. It's actually his story. It's a story about the way God is at work in the world, bringing about his redemptive purposes. It's a story about the mysterious ways that God is at work amidst the actions of humans, sometimes working through humans, sometimes working despite humans, and sometimes working with the less than ideal situations that humans create. It's a story about God who is with us. Through every twist and turn of life, he's there. He's present. And in fact, the author of this story has not only intentionally weaved all these different episodes of Joseph's story together, but this great narrative is actually weaved into an even grander story of God's activity throughout the entire biblical narrative. Remember, one of the most consistent aspects of Joseph's story is the theme of ruling. Joseph dreamed about it. Several times he was delegated authority and entrusted with responsibility to rule, which should cause us to consider, have we seen this before in God's story with humanity? Any other instances where humans have been entrusted to reign and rule? Of course we have. Back in the very beginning, back in the garden. This is from Genesis chapter 1. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Joseph's continual appointments to places of authority is a reminder of our core calling as humans. In God's story, we were created to work together with God to care for creation. Under his ultimate authority, we were given responsibility to rule over the earth in order to help the earth flourish. This was God's vision for partnership with humanity from the beginning. He entrusted humans to rule. How did that go? Are you familiar with the story? God told the humans that they could enjoy all the bounty of his creation. They could eat from any of the fruit-bearing trees except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. And she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. They didn't pass the test. They abused the responsibility and authority that they were given. They broke the trust that God had in them. Now, has Joseph faced anything like this in his story? Any situations when he was entrusted with responsibility and that trust was tested? Let me highlight a few key words in that passage to see if it helps trigger the connection. You see how the woman saw that the tree was a delight to the eyes and it was desirable? It kind of sounds like, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. And she said to him, "Lie with me." This isn't just about poor little Joseph dealing with an indecent proposal. This is a replaying of the garden test. This is the replaying of the human struggle amidst God's story for the world. What will we do when we are entrusted with responsibility? How will we act when the test is put before us? How did Joseph respond? Joseph refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in his house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Where Eve and Adam and so many others failed, Joseph has proven faithful. He's passed the test. He is trusting God's ways and he's resisting the temptation to give in to evil. This isn't simply the story of a young man with integrity. Joseph is held before us as an example of how humans are meant to handle our authority and responsibility. God has entrusted us to take care of the world, to take care of one another, and he asks that we trust him and remain faithful to him in return. You see, God has always been committed to working through humans in his story. He wants to work through us to bring about his purposes in the world. After the failure of Adam and Eve, the story of humanity continues to spiral, and the failure of humans to trust God's ways just keep getting worse and worse. As a result, God called out a group of people to get things back on track. He established a covenant with them in order to reestablish the partnership that God envisioned in the garden. And even though this group was called to be set apart, the purpose for God's work among these people was to be a blessing to the rest of the world. This is from the covenant that God made with Abram in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This was a foundational part of the story of God's people. And they knew this covenant. They knew this story. Now, keep that loaded in your memory as we return to Joseph's story. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. As a result of Joseph's rule, all the earth came for food. God is committed to working for the good of all people. And he is committed to working through humans. Humans who are willing to faithfully embrace the call to partner together with God, to bring about the flourishing of the world. Or as we like to say at Lakeview, humans who are willing to join God in the renewal of all things. So a question for you and I to ponder as we close. What authority have you been given? Do you have influence over others? Do you have the capacity to bring about good for others around you? Of course you do. We all do. It's often not about the amount of authority that we have, but rather what we will do with that authority that matters. Joseph had authority over a prison, and he found a way to work towards the ends of God. And when he had the authority over an entire nation, he found a way to work towards the ends of God. So I wonder, what is God inviting each of us into? What role is God asking you to play in his story? A role to bring about blessing for the world, for our nation, for the neighbors around us. Are we willing to partner with God? Are we willing to embrace the responsibility that we have been given? Are we going to look at the story and see that God is at work in our world? God is at work in our city. God is at work in our lives. Whatever episode we currently find ourselves in, or whatever episode might be around the corner, there's an opportunity for us to pay attention to the story of God and to enter in and to play our part. I think we should do it. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the way that Scripture illuminates our mind and our imagination to see the story that we are a part of. The story of our lives that intertwines with your story. And God, I pray that we would embrace this calling to join you, to partner together with you, to faithfully follow you, to trust you, and to enter into your story and to work towards your good purposes for the world. Open our eyes, Stir in our hearts the ways that we might be a blessing for the world, that we might see your redemption come to reality in our time. We pray this in your name. Amen. Well, love God, love others, and tell this story.